Not looking good. Welcome, everybody. John Arvosis here. This is the Arvosis Report, our nightly show talking about the latest news from Ukraine. Let me get TikTok going here. And as always, we'll wait a minute or two for folks to join us and then get rolling. Do your introductions, if you would. Say where you guys are from. And well, there we go. It's Thursday, January 5th. Lots of news today, actually. We got two big topics, so this will be fun. Fun. Hello, Vatty Dog. You're the first TikToker to join us. Rutland, UK. I've not heard of Rutland, UK. The SoCal Oblast. Hey, TikTokers, YouTubers. We can talk U.S. election, but you know, I prefer not to do it during this show. So we can always do it on my Discord for a little bit. That's always a kind of where we do an after show where we do other topics not related to Ukraine. But I like to sort of keep the topics separate since we have a nice bipartisan audience that cares about Ukraine, and I'd rather not mess that up. So, all right, guys, well, another half minute or so, and I think we'll have the our critical mass on both our services here. Hopefully it's not a slow day today, Thursday of the new year. Hey, Ron, what else we got? County Clare. Oh, yes. Ballynacaly. Oh, hey, everybody. All right, I will do my introductions here. I am John Arvosis. This is the Arvosis Report, my nightly show. Thank you, Andrew. Talking about the latest news from Ukraine. We do this Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. First half of the show is me going through the news of the day, what I think matters and why. And then second half of the show is you guys posing questions or giving your opinions as well. Tonight, we've got a couple really big stories, actually. So this is going to be an interesting show tonight. Just to remind you guys on TikTok, if any of you are new and don't know how to do it, you can go to my profile, click the Q&A link, and submit questions there, which I will get to in the second half of the show. On TikTok, YouTube and the rest, you can use the comment box at the bottom of the screen. I've got two different things going at once here, and I am independent media. I do this for free, and I am doing it full time, so I rely on your guys' gifts. Please do keep them coming on TikTok and on YouTube with the super chats and super whatever the other things are called. Thank you, Ed Sol. I just got your thing mailed out today, actually. Thank you for that, Ed Sol. Wave for the whale. All right, guys. So the two big stories tonight, very interesting. The first is news that broke about an hour ago that Germany and the U.S. are both going to be sending new weapon systems to Ukraine. Very big deal. And the second is Putin playing a game with this ceasefire for the Russian Orthodox Christmas. It's a game he's playing, and we're going to talk about why it's a game and why it's a bad idea. But first, let's talk about the good news. So really interesting news that broke. The U.S. is going to be sending 50 Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine. These are a big deal. They are not tanks, but their weapons are very good. From what I read several days ago, I'm pretty sure they were saying that the guns on the Bradleys or some of the weapons they come with, can destroy Russian tanks. I mean, these are a big deal. So this is great. The same day, the Germans announced that they will be sending dozens of Marder, M-A-R-D-E-R, Marder infantry fighting vehicles as well to Ukraine, which is amazing. The Germans also announced, in cooperation with the Americans, that they are going to be sending a Patriot missile battery to Ukraine. That means Ukraine so far will get 2 Patriot missile batteries. One is from the U.S., the other is going to come from Germany. This is a great deal across the board. Now, keep in mind, just yesterday we found out that France had announced that it was going to be sending light tanks to Ukraine. So this is a very interesting development. Clearly, it's all tied together. Whether it was planned this way, it's hard to say. Now, I will say, we had news last Friday that Biden was considering giving the Bradley fighting vehicles. We then had the news from France yesterday that they were giving light tanks, then the news from Biden and Germany today. So I feel like what is going on, I've got a lot of different points I want to make on this, actually. The last one was from the UK. The Brits are saying that they are not ruling out sending tanks in the future. Now, let's see what happens, right? I can see people are already complaining about tanks. Dewey Duck is complaining about tanks. There is a big battle among military people as to whether light tanks are tanks or not. I'm not going to wade in, but nonetheless, it's a big deal what they're getting. Now, I had one of the guys that I really like to look to for information online about defense stuff and what matters is Mick Ryan, who is a former general from Australia. He is on. I don't remember what station he's on, if he's on Sky News or where, but I read him on Twitter. And he did a nice thread today talking about the German vehicles and the American vehicles that are now going to go to the Ukrainians. By the way, I will say, thank you, McFadge, for that. I will say that the Ukrainians still have to be trained on how to use these vehicles and on how to maintain them. Actually, the third thing they're going to be trained on is using these vehicles for combined arms, which basically means, you don't just use the vehicle to drive soldiers or to use the vehicles to fire. You've got to do it in concert with infantry walking on the ground and with air support and tanks and other things, so that they've also got to get training as to how to use this as a part of their combined work they do with their other assets. Okay, so a lot of training. There's been no news yet on how long the training will take. Now, what Mick Ryan said, the Australian general, he said, quote, "These vehicles will provide a clear qualitative increase in capability for Ukraine." That's great. I mean, that's what we want to hear. He says a single shipment probably won't suffice. As good as they are, there will be battle losses of these vehicles. More will be needed for Ukraine's offensives to come. The eventual need will be hundreds of each. Now, the U.S. has promised 50. The Germans are promising dozens. I saw one analyst say that he felt that this was going to be probably 50 from Germany as well. But again, General Ryan is saying he believes they're going to need hundreds of each. Still, big deal. He also says that he thinks we are now one step closer to the West providing tanks to Ukraine. And Ryan's last quote I wanted to read you. This is the Australian general who has a really good take on a lot of the military stuff. "This is also a signal to Putin. He will need to rethink his strategic calculus for this war, assuming Ukraine will lose patience," meaning he assumed Ukraine would lose, or that Europe would lose patience. "The West has confounded Putin by not only staying the course with Ukraine, but continuously providing more and better equipment and munitions." I will say that is, I think, one of the most important things that came out of today, is that even though these weapon systems that the US and Germany are providing are incredibly important, and as Ryan said earlier, qualitatively a big difference versus what we were giving previously, it also is showing a change in the mindset of the American government, the German government, right? A lot of complaints about Germany in the past, but this was great what Germany did. The French government, which is another government where there have been complaints about, right? This is a big deal that we are seeing another, I hate to use the word escalation because it's the word that the people who are afraid keep using, like Biden. Everybody keeps using the word escalation, like we don't want to escalate. I'm fine with using the word escalation. This is an escalation, and it's great. It shows a couple things, I think. One, it's a vote of confidence for Ukraine. What I mean by that is it is further evidence that we believe Ukraine is doing a good job and can even do a better job with more weapons. Okay, that's important. If we thought Ukraine was losing or gonna lose, we might not want to give them more weapons. Why give somebody weapons if they're going to lose anyway, right? Second of all, I think it is a vote of concern that Russia is not serious about negotiating. I had mentioned yesterday that one of the things that's been popping into my head recently was, even though I am not convinced that NATO wants Ukraine to win, NATO wants Russia to, well, let me rephrase this. NATO does not want Ukraine to win, and NATO does not want Russia to lose, okay? But NATO, this is confused, but NATO also doesn't want Russia to win. What I mean by that is NATO doesn't want Russia to just take over Ukraine. That would be bad. That would it would destroy Ukraine, and it would empower Russia to go after other countries, possibly NATO countries. But NATO doesn't want Ukraine to win either, because they're afraid that if Ukraine takes all of its land back, including Crimea in the south, that the Russians may freak out, and the Russians may use their nuclear weapons and things like this, right? So I think what NATO wants is to have the war go, keep Ukraine alive, give the Ukrainians enough to stay alive, to stay in the fight, give Ukrainians enough to start taking their land back, so the Russians go, you know what, this isn't working, right? And eventually the Russians say, we've got to negotiate. But here's the trick. but that the Ukrainians do not have enough weapons and good enough weapons that they think they can win it. Because if the Ukrainians think they can get all of their land back, why wouldn't they take all of their land back? Of course they would, right? Their land was stolen by the Russians. So I think the West still doesn't want Ukraine to take all of the land back because they're afraid if Ukraine takes Crimea, the Russians will get angry, right? So it's this fine equilibrium we're trying to do of giving the Ukrainians just enough to keep them alive, just enough to push the Russians back slowly, but not too much so that eventually the Ukrainians and the Russians both go, we can't win this war. We just can't win. We've got to negotiate, right? This was a long way of saying that I think the West is now very upset with what's going on with the Ukrainians, with the Russians. I mean, that the West is looking at this and saying, you know what, the Russians aren't serious. They totally plan to still take all of Ukraine. They want to destroy the country. They want to annex the entire country of Ukraine and make it part of Russia. And if that's the case, the West has to do something to further convince Russia that negotiations are important. How does it do it? It gives Ukraine better weapons, right? So that basically the West said, you know what? Russia is still too proud and confident. There's still too much hubris. We need to convince the Russians that they can't win it. And the only way to do that is giving Ukraine better weapons. So there you go. Some people are saying that they're having some issues on TikTok. Is everything okay? A couple people were saying the echo, there's an echo and other stuff. Is it working okay for you guys in general? I just want to make sure. I know TikTok's about 8 seconds before. Just want to make sure there. Okay, good. What else? Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The final point I was going to raise on this is it's going to be interesting to see how long the training takes. Remember what I'd said about how in order for the Ukrainians to use the Bradley fighting vehicles or the Marder, the German ones, Marder, not Martyr, fighting vehicles that the Germans are providing, they're going to need training on how to use them and training on how to maintain them, right? You know, you got to keep the vehicles going so they don't break down, or if they do break down, you got to fix them. I am going to be curious to see how long that takes and when the Ukrainians actually get these weapons, because what'll be interesting to see is that I want to see the big battle that happens when the Ukrainians get these weapons and really use them, and whether that's going to be battles this winter or whether that's going to be battles in the spring. You know, once spring comes and we're talking about possible Russian offensives, possible Ukrainian offensives. Anyway, this is great news. I mean, this is great news. And actually, I'll make one final point here. I really think, and I'm glad that there clearly has been a change in the Western mindset. If Germany, France, and America, I would say 3 of the top countries who were very, let's say, a little too worried about helping Ukraine. Thank you, Benji, for that, for the llama. I'm not sure. It's sort of hard to explain this. I was going to use the word worry warts, but I'm not sure if the non-Americans know the phrase, but meaning somebody who sits there and goes, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I think there was a little bit too much of, oh my God, from Biden, from Scholz in Germany, and from Macron in France. A little bit too much fear about Putin and not enough standing up to Putin. This is a significant change. In any case, I'll stop with that. Let me do a quick reset, and then next we're going to talk about the Russians making this ridiculous claim of wanting a ceasefire. I am John Aravosis. You are watching the Aravosis Report. This is my nightly show, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine. First half of the show, I go through the news, which I'm doing right now for you guys, and then the second half of the show, I take your questions, your comments, and we discuss for like half an hour or something like that. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, questions on TikTok. You can use the Q&A link that's in my profile. Submit questions that way. On YouTube and everywhere else, use the comment box at the bottom. And please keep the gifts coming. I do this for free, and your guys' gifts help keep me going and help support my work too. Help me keep doing this, so I appreciate it. I also have a Patreon. I have a Patreon as well. Patreon.com/Aravosis. For anybody who's been watching for a while and you like my work, maybe go to Patreon. It's a way where you can just chip in $5 a month to support my work. And it's actually tied to my Discord, which we'll talk about later. But it's just a nice way to support my work if you can afford it. Patreon.com/Aravosis. Okay, so next topic. The Russians are calling for a temporary ceasefire from noon on January 6th, which would be tomorrow, through midnight of January 7th, which is Saturday. The reason is because tomorrow night, Friday night, thank you, Inspired Woman, for the train. Tomorrow night, is the Russian Orthodox Christmas Eve. Oh, thank you, Anthony, for that. I appreciate the sticker. Is the Russian Orthodox Christmas Eve. January 7th is the day the Russian Orthodox celebrate Christmas. Now, there are some issues here, okay, with what Putin is doing. First of all, the demand for a ceasefire, the announcement, actually came from the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Kirill, who is basically in bed with Vladimir Putin. He's an arm of the Russian government. He's an arm of the Putin government. So, and I love this. CNN mentioned this earlier. I think it was CNN mentioned this earlier. He is someone who earlier had said, military service washes away all sin. This guy has been pushing the war from day one, and really angrily and nastily, whatever. He's the one pushing this, but it's not him. Putin is the one who came up with the idea. Now, Christmas Eve, okay? On Christmas Eve, let's look at this. The Russians are saying, oh, we're such pious people, right, that we just can't fight on the Russian Christmas. Here's the problem. The bigger holiday in Russia, a couple of big holidays, New Year's Eve. Russia was fine fighting on New Year's Eve, which is actually a much bigger holiday than Christmas. Second of all, the biggest holiday of all, I'm Orthodox Christian as well, I'm Greek Orthodox. The biggest holiday for Orthodox Christians, not me personally, I prefer Christmas, but the biggest holiday for pious Orthodox Christians is Easter. The biggest holiday for Russian Orthodox is Easter. It's not Christmas. Christmas is a big deal for like Americans, right? I'm assuming Europeans too, a lot of Europeans, but not all. For the Russians, it's not that big a deal. Putin didn't call a ceasefire for Easter. The Ukrainians proposed a ceasefire for Easter, right? Easter was last April or so. What did the Russians do? The Russians said no, and they bombed the Ukrainians anyway. So let's put aside the notion that, oh, Putin has suddenly discovered God and Jesus, and he wants to celebrate, the birth of Jesus. Putin didn't give a darn about Easter, but he also didn't give a darn, and this is the other interesting point with this, the Ukrainians tend to celebrate Christmas on December 25th, along with most of the rest of us, right? The Russians do January 7th. Some Ukrainians do January 7th, but most Ukrainians, from what I've been told now, have switched or have been doing December 25th. So this is also an effort, two different things going on here. Putin knew on December 25th that he was bombing Ukrainians on their Christmas, and he didn't care, right? Thank you, Kirk de Leon, for those fireworks. I know that's very generous of you. Thank you. He knew, and he didn't care, okay? If he's trying to pretend he's a pious Christian, you don't bomb people on Christmas Day, okay? You don't do it if you're trying to play the Christmas card. Second of all, and this is where Putin is being really cute about this, by getting the Ukrainians to agree to a Christmas ceasefire on the day that Ukrainians tend not to celebrate Christmas, right? Ukrainian Christmas tends to be December 25th. Putin is trying to force the Ukrainians to acknowledge that January 7th is the real Christmas and not December 25th when most Ukrainians celebrate it. That's why he wasn't willing to do a ceasefire on actual Christmas, on the Christmas the rest of us celebrate, and why he's trying to get the Ukrainians to agree to Christmas tomorrow night and on Saturday. Do you get how nasty that is? He's trying to get the Ukrainians to basically acknowledge, yeah, Russian Christmas is the real Christmas. Ukrainian Christmas isn't the real one. Some other issues here. Ceasefires overall. The Russians would love nothing better than a ceasefire. It's a bad idea. Who else is proposing a ceasefire? Erdogan, the dictator in Turkey, who is a member of NATO, supposedly on our side. He has been pushing Putin for a ceasefire. Here's why a ceasefire is a bad idea. The best analogy I've been giving for you guys has been, imagine we're in a race, okay, in a running race, okay? And Dan, I'm going to tag your question and come back to it later, so at least I see it. Imagine we're in a running race, okay? I'm Ukraine, you're Russia. We're racing each other. You were doing well at the beginning of the race. I caught up. I'm actually doing better than you now. And even better, I'm not only doing better than you in this running race, but again, Ukraine, I have more energy than you have. I've got more motivation. You're actually kind of freaking out in the race that we're running against each other, and you're very tired. and you're not able to do well. Thank you. Nothing for you for that. Nothing for you. Whatever. That's your name for the gift there on TikTok. Right. So I've got a lot of energy. I've got a lot of enthusiasm. I've got a lot of motivation, and you are freaked out and you're exhausted and you're losing the race. You say, you know what? Let's take a break for a day and a half in this race. Hey, it's Christmas, right? I think we should both just take a break. Well, who does that benefit most? It doesn't benefit both of us. If you're taking a break in the war, a break, whether it's a day and a half, whether it's a week or a month, helps the people who are exhausted. It helps the people who need time to dig in, right? The Russians, my little handy dandy map again, the Russians have, still occupied 18% of Ukraine, okay? The Russians are occupying more or less this and this, all right? The Russians want time so that they can stop fighting Ukraine and put all of their men into digging trenches, into digging, walls, into digging every bit of support they can to defend their current positions. Because guess what? It's going to be a lot harder for Ukraine to take those territories after a ceasefire in which Russia has basically had time to build its defenses. But what else will Russia have time to do? Russia will have time to rest. Because, again, the Russians are in much worse shape than the Ukrainians. Not only are they tired, not only are they demoralized, right? They haven't been well trained. They've got a whole ton of new troops that came in, and we know they haven't trained these guys. Having a ceasefire, maybe not a ceasefire of a day and a half, but a ceasefire of a week, 2 weeks, a month, gives the Russians time to actually train their troops. It gives them time, by the way. Remember how the Russians, they don't have food? Thank you, Ben, for that. For the llama there. The Russians haven't had time or a desire to get their troops food and water. They haven't gotten them. A lot of them don't have good weapons or any weapons. They don't have enough ammunition. Having a truce gives the Russians time to build more ammunition, to get their supply line straightened out. Anyway, bottom line is, and that's why I go back to the race example. Anybody who's saying, let's have a ceasefire. The problem is, here's the other problem with the ceasefire, is this isn't a situation where, the war isn't going anywhere and we're firing across the border at each other, right? And we can just stop and then start firing again. Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia is currently occupying 18% of Ukraine, right? All right. Now people are complaining about buffering on TikTok. I'm just bringing it up again, just so folks know. Again, mods, you let me know if things are bad enough. I can go out and restart the live. All right, just let me know. All right. So the what was I going to say? The final issue with this is, this is a situation where the Russians have invaded. The Russians occupy 18% of Ukraine. The Russians have killed lots of Ukrainians. The Russians have kidnapped lots of Ukrainians, okay? A lot of Ukrainian men and women, but also children. We don't even know how many tens of thousands, if not more, children have been kidnapped to Russia. This is not a situation where you say, you know what? Let's just stop and take a break. Anyway, that's why this whole issue of a ceasefire is just a really bad idea. But as I said, I think the worst part of this is, So the worst part of it is, and then why Russia's doing it in the end. The worst part is you're going to give Russia time to regroup. You're giving Russia time to catch its breath, right? To bring in new troops, to train the new troops, to finally get the troops weapons, to give the troops just a break. I mean, to give the troops a month off that they could, even Christmas, to give them a little time to kind of go, because the Russians are freaking out. The Ukrainians are hurting them badly, right? Thank you, Chris and Ted. That was sweet of you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that on YouTube. So that's the problem. Now, why are the Russians doing it? It's smart what Putin's doing, actually. Putin is putting Ukraine in a position where Ukraine has to say, we're not going to agree to a ceasefire. And what does Putin do? Putin makes it look like he's the guy. He's the guy who wants to stop fighting, right? He's willing to stop fighting on Russian Christmas. But those mean, what's the word I'm looking for? Those mean, warmongering Ukrainians, they just keep fighting. I tried to stop. They wouldn't agree to a ceasefire, right? He's playing a public relations game. Even though normal people in the West won't believe it, you still could have some people who forget. Okay, the Fox News types, Tucker Carlson will love it. What are you doing? Sorry, my dog is sitting here whining. You all right? Tucker Carlson. Here, sorry, quick hello. I got you. Quick hello from the dog. This is Sasha. You can look at her. I love that my dog has bedhead. She just woke up. There you go. Okay, sorry. She just woke up, so I thought I'd have her say hi really quick. The the Russians are hoping to give Fox News, the Tucker Carlsons, all of that crowd ammunition that they can further claim. And the thing is, also, look what they're. You're all right. You get out there. Go on. She doesn't know how to open the. Did I not teach you anything? Oh my God, you're terrible. I never taught my dog how to open the door of my parents' place. So the door in my living room is pretty open, and she just can't figure it out. You know what? It's buffering for my sister too. It's buffering for my sister too. I don't know. I'm just a little worried on TikTok whether I should just restart it, because my sister just messaged me and said it's buffering for her as well. As long as you guys are sure that there's not a ton of you, all right. Okay. All right. As long as it's not a ton of you, I'll let it go. Okay, thanks, guys. I just like to keep clear because it's funny because we've had problems with YouTube before, but this is the first time that TikTok in a long time has been having bigger issues than YouTube. YouTube's been like crystal clear. So I think Putin is trying to basically give the Fox News crowd more ammunition so that they can say, look at how anti-Christian Zelensky is, right? He wouldn't even stop for their Christmas, right? That's the thing. And by the way, Putin's not stupid. And Fox News isn't stupid. There's a subtle message there too. The Jewish leader of Ukraine isn't willing to even let people celebrate Christmas, right? They're not stupid. They know that that's part of the message that's coming across. So it's an anti-Semitic message, and it's an overall lie as well. All right. Anyway, there we go. Let me do a quick reset again, and then I'll continue with the rest of the news. We're good on time actually today. This is good. We should finish a little more than 27 minutes after. I am John Aravosis. You're watching the Aravosis Report. This is my daily show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine for about half an hour. And then the second half of the show, I take your guys' questions, your comments, and we just discuss the issues of the day with regards to Ukraine. I do have a Discord that you guys can check out. I'll go there for a little bit afterwards. What we've been doing the last few days is going to the Discord afterwards and discussing what's been going on with the votes in the House of Representatives to try to get a new speaker. I used to work in the U.S. Senate for about 5 years, and I've lived in Washington and worked in politics for 30 years now, 30 plus years. God, I keep forgetting it's been 30, going towards 34 years in politics. So we're going to go over to Discord afterwards and just have a chat about kind of the latest, what's going on. It's discord.aravosis.com. Check it out. Okay. Oh, and actually, all of the links for my Discord and Patreon and everything else, you can find on TikTok in my profile, just the Linktree link. It's right there. It links to all of my links. For you guys, you can go to aravosis.com. That's also my last name, aravosis.com. And it'll bring up all my links. But please do keep the gifts coming. As I said, I am doing this for free and trying to do it full time. I shouldn't say I am doing it for full time. So you guys are helping me pay the bills, and I appreciate it. Let's keep going. Okay, a little more stuff here. Putin is saying, and Putin reiterated in the last few days that, and get this, he's, as much as he wants a ceasefire, he's not willing to negotiate with Ukraine unless Ukraine accepts all of the Russian how do I put this? He's not willing to negotiate with Ukraine unless Ukraine says, okay, we're going to, are you kidding me, Sasha? Seriously? Oh God. All right, guys, we're having like a dog emergency here. I hate to do this. The people who join me in the Discord understand how this works. My dog is being evil and has to go out 1 second. She's got a problem with this where when she's got to go, she's got to go. I took her before the show. Sorry. All right. Hang on a minute. I apologize. This is what my live show is about, guys. The dog. 1 second. Sasha, I'm going to kill you. I took you out. Come here. You are out of your mind. God. All right. Sorry about that, folks. The dog is 13, and when the dog's got to go, the dog's got to go. So there are two things in my life that take precedence, mom and the dog. And when either of them come for my attention, I give it to them. So sorry about that. Okay, so here's the deal here. The Russians currently occupy, as I showed you guys before, 18% of Ukraine, okay? So all of this. Putin, sorry, let's see the whole map. All of this. Putin is saying that he won't even sit down to negotiate peace with the Ukrainians unless the Ukrainians agree first to give Russia all of this land that the Russians are currently occupying. So the Ukrainians, to even negotiate with the Russians, first have to say, oh yeah, we're going to give you all of this and make it Russia. Right? That is part of the reason I think, and it takes us back to the beginning of the show, that's part of the reason I think NATO finally said, you know what? We're going to give Ukraine these infantry fighting vehicles, the Bradleys from the America, the Marder vehicles from Germany, the French light tanks that they announced this week as well. I think a lot of the reason that happened is because Putin made clear he doesn't even want to negotiate. I mean, that his demands are so crazy that basically they've got to up the pressure on Putin. A couple more little stories here. The Ukrainian military claimed on Thursday, today, that 800 Russian soldiers were killed yesterday, mostly in fighting in eastern Ukraine. I don't know if it's true. It's a heck of a claim because that's a hell of a lot of men for the Russians to lose in one day. That's a lot. I mean, earlier in the war, we were hearing that the Ukrainians and the Russians might have been losing a couple hundred a day. At one point, I think, thank you, Zoe. At one point, I think the number went up as high as 500 a day, and that was considered a huge number. But the idea that the Russians lost 800 potentially yesterday, that would be huge. The New York Times says that the head of Russia's paramilitary Wagner group just said that their first group of prisoners has now been pardoned. So the Wagner group is this mercenary group, basically guns for hire. They work around the world. They're murderers. Thank you, Pam, for that. They're murderers. And the Wagner group has been helping Putin fight this war, of course, because it's a Russian group run by an oligarch, a Russian billionaire who's very close to Putin. And the Wagner group decided to go, and Putin obviously told them to do this, go to Russian prisons and take, thank you, Marcy, go to Russian prisons and take prisoners and tell them, we're going to expunge your record if you fight for us for 6 months or however long in the war against Ukraine. So they got anywhere from 35,000 to 40,000 prisoners, something like 10% I read of Russia's prisons, and put them in the military, in this Wagner military. And the first group of them has hit their 6 month, their 6 month limit. So they've now been pardoned and they're back in society. The thing that's screwed up about that is, thank you, Cheryl, for that. The thing, my dog, sorry, my dog is, I can show the TikTokers. This is what I'm dealing with in the corner here. My dog, hey, enough. My dog is sitting here off camera and she's got her big squeaky toy in her mouth and she's going, and she's trying to get me to play with her. But you can't hear the growl. The growl is the best thing because it's this like, you want to come up? Come on up. All right. Now she's sitting next to me. She's like, all right. Oh my God, they crack me up. Thank you for the heart there, Al. So the thing that cracks me up with the Wagner is, they've got 35,000 to 40,000. Thank you, Daisy. 35,000 to 40,000 prisoners working for the Russian military. And they're guilty of a lot of really bad crimes. It's not like they kept it to people who, stole like shoplifting. I mean, they included everybody. Thank you, Cheryl, for the llama there. They included everybody. Well, it's not like these guys still aren't, I'm afraid to use some of the words. I don't want to get TikTok banning me, but you know what I mean. Violent crimes. They're still violent people. And actually, I would argue it's not like they've proven that they've gotten better by going to Ukraine and killing people. I mean, the way they proved that they're actually okay and no longer criminals is they went and killed people for 6 months in Ukraine. That doesn't mean you're not a criminal. That kind of, I would say, potentially reinforces the criminality in you, right? If you were convicted of murder and they said, hey, why didn't you come do a little more murder. Anyway, I think it's pretty screwed up. Last little two stories. Ukraine recorded the largest annual fall in its gross domestic product, which basically is economic growth. Thank you, Mariam. Very sweet of you. And you didn't even ask a hard question. I'm thank you for that. Ukraine recorded the largest annual fall in its gross domestic product, which is basically its economic growth. Its economy shrunk by 30%, so almost by a third in the last year because of Russia's invasion. And finally, the Consumer Technology Association, which I think is the really cool tech conference that takes every year in Las Vegas, has banned Russian companies from displaying their gadgets at the tech show because of the invasion of Ukraine. Apparently, it is only impacting one Russian exhibitor because there's only one. But nonetheless, the folks putting on the conference said, they're big supporters of Ukraine, and they just couldn't stomach the idea of a Russian company coming and selling stuff. So I thought that was nice. Good for them. All right. So let's dive in here. On TikTok, as I was saying, you guys can. Oh, actually, the other thing I keep forgetting to mention is I do have a store set up as well. You can buy cool Ukraine-themed goods. It's store.aravosis.com. Or again, just go to the link in my profile on TikTok. One of the things will show you my store. For the rest of you, go to aravosis.com. And you'll see it. But the store is kind of neat because we've got a lot of Ukrainian-themed goods, designs, and things. And what I'm doing with that is 50% of the proceeds from the store I am channeling back into the humanitarian aid projects we do in Ukraine. As you may know, we've raised over $80,000 for humanitarian aid in Ukraine. That doesn't even count the money from the store. Several $1,000s from the store already has gone to help the Ukrainians as well. And then 50% of the sales also go to support my work because, as I've told you guys, I'm doing this full time. So I actually need to be paid because I've got to pay the bills so that I can keep doing this. So please check out the store as well, store.aravosis.com. Let me now check here. There was a question actually from Dan from earlier in the show. Dan said, with more and more support coming into Ukraine, I know it would only be a huge but educated guess. What, if anything, do you think Putin's red line would be for using nukes? I am not convinced, Dan, as sort of regular listeners of the show know, I'm not convinced there's any red line for Putin using nukes. The issue is Putin could use nuclear weapons in two ways. One of which would be using what is called a tactical nuclear weapon, which would be, well, let me go back. One of them would be using a big nuclear weapon, like ICBMs, okay? Right, the big ones that we launch in the sky, they go into the stratosphere and they land and they destroy entire cities, right? Putin's not going to do that against the West, first of all. That's not going to happen. The reason I always give for this, thank you, Bonnie, for the whale. If we got another whale, we'll give a wave, literally a wave. Thank you, Bonnie. Putin isn't going to use the big nuclear weapons and attack us because we've got nuclear submarines. And the Russians could literally obliterate every American in the country. They could obliterate every Frenchman, every British subject. And what would happen? These nuclear submarines that Britain has, the nuclear submarines that France has, and the nuclear submarines that America has would survive the attack because it's very difficult to knock out. It's almost impossible to knock out submarines. They're impossible to find. And our nuclear weapons on those subs would then attack Russia and destroy Russia. The same thing would happen if we decided we were going to launch a sneak attack on Russia. We could do it. We could launch all of our missiles. And guess what Russia's going to do? First of all, some of Russia's missiles are going to survive on land anyway, and they would fire at us. But Russia has nuclear submarines too. And even if we obliterated Russia, the nuclear submarines would come and obliterate us. So no one's going to be launching a nuclear attack on the West or on Russia. That's the first thing. What about Putin's red line for, thank you, Joe, for that. What about Putin's red line for using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine? Sip of water. I don't think he'd use those either because I think it would be a disaster for him and he knows it. The issue here is any policy at all that you would be doing as a leader, but frankly, anybody, I mean, any of you guys as well, right? If you were thinking of doing something, you would in your brain say, okay, what are the benefits of me choosing this option? What are the negatives of me choosing this option? And you'd balance it and say, on balance, is it more positive or more negative for me if I do X, Y, or Z? Okay. Well, let's apply it to nukes. The military experts, all the military experts say there's no military benefit to Russia nuking Ukraine. It literally wouldn't help Russia win the war. In a strategic sense, meaning in a military sense. It's not like, Ukraine's got all of its troops in one place and Russia could drop some nukes and kill every Ukrainian soldier. That doesn't work that way, right? They're all over the country. It wouldn't do any benefit. Second of all, if Russia were to, I see the questions coming in, guys. I've got them highlighted. I will come to them in a second on YouTube. The second problem is if Russia were to use its nukes, it would contaminate the ground. And guess what happens? How does Russia occupy land that's been nuked? It can't. No one can occupy the land for 30,000 years or until you literally, and what I read was 3 feet or 6 feet, I forget exactly what, they would have to dig down and literally take away all the soil down several feet because the soil would be so radioactive. Not only that, they would have to remove every building and every plant from the area that has been nuked, and all of that material would be radioactive, and it too would then have to be stored somewhere, forever because it would be radioactive. There is no way that Russia wants to do that to land it wants to take. Third issue, I don't want to spend too much time on nukes, but it always comes up, so it's worth talking about. Third issue. One of the reasons Russia might want to use nuclear weapons is thinking, hey, it's really going to scare the Ukrainians and make them cave, right? They'll finally quit. Well, I always say, does anybody really think the Ukrainians are the type that, hey, if you just bomb them a little harder, right, they'll quit? I mean, we've seen that that's not the case. And I would say, especially if you use a nuke, the Ukrainians, I think, would be so livid. I would be fearful for what the Ukrainians would do if the Russians used a nuke. I don't think they would cave. There's also, and I was reading this a couple of weeks ago, it is apparent, I didn't actually know this, it's apparently debated as to whether, for example, the Americans dropping the nuclear weapons in Japan, right, 2 nuclear weapons in World War II, whether it ended the war in Japan because the Japanese government saw the horror of it and said, we can't have them do this to more of our cities, or whether it was because, and I guess one of the prevailing theories is that it actually was because by hitting 2 of Japan's top cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Americans destroyed Japan's industrial capacity. They destroyed so many factories and so many workers that the Japanese economy couldn't keep up the war effort, right? So, bottom line is, you're not going to convince the Ukrainians not to fight by using nukes. The final reason the Russians won't use it, and this comes to the negative, because they've got a balance, right? What's the positive of me using nukes? And so far there isn't one. What's the negative of me using nukes? NATO would get involved in the war. I don't know whether NATO would, we're talking about whether Russia would use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. I don't know whether NATO would attack Russia. Some people have proposed, some former generals have proposed that NATO should go in. If Russia uses nukes, NATO should go in and destroy the Russian fleet in Sevastopol in southern Ukraine. Others have said that, yep, I see the super chats. I'll get to them in a sec. Others have said that we need to go in and destroy basically every soldier on the ground. I think, for example, that we might put a no-fly zone over all of Ukraine and say, you know what, that's it. If basically no one is flying over Ukraine. Any Russian plane that flies will be destroyed. Any Russian missiles will be destroyed. Any Russian radars. But I think that Russia is having such a hard time with this war that the last thing they need is NATO entering the war as well, and they know it. So I don't think there's any benefit to them entering the war. Okay, lots of questions here. Hang on a sec. Lots of super chat questions. So thank you for that, guys. Paul Gray, what is stopping Moldova and or Georgia retaking occupied parts of their countries while Russia is busy in Ukraine? Nothing but their ability to do so, right? The Moldovans don't have much of an army. Georgia, I'm not really up on as much, but I know Moldova, it's just not great. Moldova, part of Romania, more or less, I'm going to say more or less here. I may be doing this poorly, but it's more or less here. The Russians had invaded and a long time ago and have kind of been protecting this breakaway region called Transnistria that, of course, the Moldovans don't recognize. The Russians have themselves been threatening to invade Moldova. So there's been a concern as to whether the Russians themselves might even go after Moldova. But I would say that, yes, there is, if you have the ability and I don't know the Moldovans have enough of a military to do this. If you have the ability to get back land that the Russians took from you, or frankly, take some Russian land that you want, you are in a much better position today than you were a year ago. One, because Russia's military is in such worse shape than they were a year ago, because they've been destroyed. Two, because the Russian military we now know is not in that good of shape. A year ago, we thought the Russian military was, the second or third biggest or greatest, most powerful army in the world. Now we're going, not so much, right? So Russia should worry that they should be worried about other countries on their borders settle. Japan with the Northern Islands, or the Kuril Islands as they're called. The Russians stole, the Soviets, but the Russians really stole some islands from Japan at the end of World War II. Same thing there. Is now a good time? I mean, I think America wouldn't be too thrilled about Japan starting a war with Russia, with China there and everything else. But if you were the Japanese, now is a better time than ever if you wanted to get the land back. The problem is, do you really have a big enough military to do it, and could you succeed? It's not clear. And like the question earlier, would Russia potentially use their nuclear weapons, right? Joe, thank you for the super sticker there. I appreciate that. Ben, what do we got? What do you think the Russian response will be to the West giving Ukraine armored vehicles? I think they're going to just drop more bombs on Ukraine. This is where I say why I don't think Russia's going to use nukes. Russia doesn't have anything else they can use at this point, right? What more can they do to Ukraine? They only have so many missiles. They've been using the drones from Iran that they've been getting. They're trying to get more of them. But beyond that, it's not like Russia has an extra level of badness they can do. I mean, they're already killing civilians left and right. So what more can they do? I don't think that. I think my guess is you will see the Russians try to maybe have a bigger attack tonight and the next couple nights. But at some point, other than drones, they're running out. Now, a final point with that, which is interesting. A lot of us have been saying forever that I think biological weapons, by the way, I see Andy raise biological weapons. I put biological weapons and chemical weapons in the same category as nuclear weapons. I hope the West has made clear to Russia that if they use any of those three in Ukraine, we're going to get involved. I do think, however, that the idea of nuclear weapons is such a level above psychologically, right? Because let's face it, even for us, even though a small nuclear weapon may kill fewer people than a biological weapon or a chemical weapon, the idea of them using chemical weapons in Ukraine would be horrific. But chemical weapons were used in Syria, right? I mean, it's sort of like it's something that's been done, even though it's horrible. And the images in Syria were just, I mean, we got them here in the States. The videos were horrible of these poor children that were dying horrible deaths. But using a nuclear weapon, just the sound of that, a nuclear weapon going off, I think is a whole other level. So I worry to some degree whether America and the West would respond more strongly about Russia using nukes than using biological or chemical. I hope not, but I think, I don't know. Who knows, right? Who knows? Hang on, I'm going to knock off a couple of these here. Paul Cecil, how are you? How long do you think until these drafted Russian troops, the new ones, I'm assuming, just turn on their incompetent commanders fully? There's got to be some anger there. Yeah, I mean, the Ukrainians have certainly been basically the new 200,000 troops that Russia drafted. And we have heard more and more wire intercepts, which are basically electronic intercepts from the Ukrainians, where electronic eavesdropping, right? Of the Russians on their phones, calling their family, and just talking about how poorly they're treated. They don't have food. They don't have water. They don't have ammunition. A lot of them haven't even been given orders. Like they've been sent to the front, but they don't even know what they're doing. Like they don't know why they're there, other than the fact that they're there to get killed, right? But they don't know why they're even there, and they're getting sick of it. The question becomes, I don't know that we know how many Russians are necessarily, not defecting. I guess they could be defecting to Ukraine, or just simply deserting, where they're leaving their military outfits and leaving. You would hope as well that the Russians might turn on their own military commanders. We've had some reports of that, of soldiers turning on each other. Remember a couple months ago, we had the report from Belgorod, which is right across the Ukrainian border in the northeast, right across from Kharkiv, of some Russian troops, the new recruits that were being, trained with their target practice for a day. And I think the commander in charge of them started making fun of all things. He had 3 recruits there, I believe, from Muslim areas of Russia. I forget where they were from. And the commander decides he's going to start making fun of their religion, and specifically making fun of Allah by name. Allah is God, but was it Allah or Muhammad? It could have been Muhammad or it could have been Allah, but either way, it's either God or, I will say that for anybody who really doesn't know Islam, the Islamic version of Jesus is it's their prophet, right? So it's one or the other. And they turn to these guys who are devout. Tajikistan, they're Dagestan. I think it might have been Dagestan, actually. Ben is saying, I think that might have been it. It was Allah. Okay, thanks, guys. It was Allah. It was God. And turns to these people who are devoutly religious and starts telling them basically their God. And I don't know if he said a piece of shit or something. It was horrific what he said. The guy apparently turns to the other Muslim troops and says, because there were other Muslims there too, and told them, step back in Arabic. They step back, and he and his 2 friends open fire on like 25 or 30 Russians who are there doing their military training, killing. I remember the number was at least 14 or 15 killed. It was probably more than that. So we know there are not great relations. I saw something the other day, but I'll stop with this because it's interesting though. I saw something the other day of another Russian phone intercept, and he was talking about the Chechens and the Buryats. The Buryats, I even had to look up Buryats. Buryats, I didn't remember the name, but I remembered the town in the region is Ulan-Ude, which I remember that town. That's who the Buryats are. And the Chechens, we all know, the Chechens are this sort of nasty Muslim fighting force run by Kadyrov, who's this big friend of Putin, and rather murderous individuals who like to do TikTok videos. Well, the Russian soldier was saying that all the Chechens and the Buryats do, they don't fight. They leave it for the Russians to fight. So the Russians are getting killed. The Chechens and the Buryats go and basically rob all the other Russian troops, steal all their stuff, kill them. What's the word? I'll say sexually violate them. So I don't use the keywords that gets TikTok upset. I mean, really horrific accusations. And actually, I remember where I read this. This was in a suicide letter that one of the Russian soldiers wrote, where he was explaining why he did it. And he was saying because of how horrifically he was treated and how horrific these. So there's a lot of bad blood there. I would hope the Russian troops are starting to sort of stand up and go, you know what? We're not going to do this anymore. Motec Missy just weighed in. And again, we'll talk about this after the show in the Discord. But Motec Missy just weighed in and said, Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida, who's a very, I'll say far right, but far right, he's far MAGA. He's far MAGA. Because the MAGA thing isn't necessarily right. It's a very weird thing in the political spectrum. He's far MAGA. He's a Trumper, voted for Trump for Speaker of the House. Yeah, that's thank you, Meg. I will make one quick comment about that, but again, we'll do the Discord chat afterwards where we'll talk about this vote in the House. I've been saying from the beginning, it would be very interesting to see what would the Republicans do if somebody officially nominates Trump, right? Would they vote against Trump and vote for McCarthy? I don't really know. I don't know. It's interesting though. All right, let me go to the TikTok questions too. Sorry, those were the paid questions on YouTube, and I always do the paid questions first because it's people contributing, and I very much support that. I do support that. I very much appreciate it as well. Hang on, Q&A, TikTok. How many times do you think you're going to have to explain why Russia will not drop nukes? Hey, people keep asking. What do you want me to do? The thing is, the question really does come up a lot, and I think it's the thing that worries people the most. So I kind of feel like it's hard, it's hard not to. We do need to, the good question, Ellen. Poppy, well, we were working on something. Poppy, Wendy Turner, who's wonderful and has designed a number of our shirts over at the store, the Airvosis Report store, which is store.airvosis.com. She's designed a lot of the cool shirts that are there. And we talked about figuring out an Airvosis Report shirt, but we still haven't quite figured out what it would be. So would love to, but we got to kind of figure out the idea first. And Wendy's still working on a few other shirts. Sorry, make sure I didn't miss any. Okay. Don't think I've got anything either. Let me find another TikTok question. Do you think the U.S. is profiting from the war by selling weapons, etc.? The thing is, I don't know. I tried looking into this and it's very confusing. I don't know to what degree the US government is giving Ukraine weapons, to what degree, we expect payment at some point for any of the weapons. I don't know. I've not heard a lot of talk saying that, we're going to get paid for them. The US defense companies, the defense contractors are certainly making money, of course, right? Of course they are. That makes sense because it's their weapons being used. So if their weapons get used, they've got to go and buy new ones, right? We've got to go and buy new ones, and we are. Some of the new money that was appropriated for Ukraine, some of the money, there's this new $40 billion that was in the budget deal, and this $40 billion over the next year, some of it is going for to help rebuild the U.S. weapons stockpile, because the U.S. has given so many weapons to Ukraine. We've got to build up our own weapons again, whether it's HIMARS, I don't know what else, our own, probably artillery, probably a lot of our artillery as well. So that certainly helps the defense contractors. I will say I don't have a problem with that because we're not a communist dictatorship. We can't just make companies produce weapons and not pay them for them, right? That's how business works. So, of course, if we're giving Ukraine weapons, we've got to buy new weapons, and companies are making money off of that. Where else are we making the weapons from? They've got to be paid for. So I hear you, but I'm not too worried about it, because also I know the reason we're supporting Ukraine. And, thank you, Bonnie. It's not like we're supporting Ukraine because, we all want to make money for defense contractors. That's clearly not what's going on. So I'm not too worried about it. Fair question, but I'm not too worried about it. It could increase production and help the economy. Yep. That's certainly, Terry is saying that on TikTok. That was something with World War II. World War II, I believe from what I'd read, finally helped the U.S. economy get out of the Great Depression, right? The Depression went till 1929 until like 1938 or so. I want to say 38 or 38, I think was it, when finally the U.S. economy started to turn around. And I believe, even though we didn't enter the war at that point, it was it certainly was World War II that finally really helped World War II also set the U.S. up for, being sort of an economic superpower after that point as well. Beep, 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 looking for more questions on TikTok. Is Russia on the way of becoming a failed state? I don't think so. I think we'd have to look up the definition. A failed state is a concept in political science, international relations. When I think of a failed state, I think of a country that you kind of forced into existence and it can't support itself, right? It can't raise money to pay its bills, so it can't do anything. It can't defend itself. It can't pay for infrastructure. It can't pay for education. It can't pay for fighting diseases. It can't do anything, right? And the country's falling apart at the seams in terms of political rivalries and things. What I mean by that is, Yugoslavia, for example. Yugoslavia could have been a failed state at the end, maybe not economically, but because you had Yugoslavia was made up of basically, like the Soviet Union, a number of individual countries, individual peoples that finally said, we're not one country. What are we doing here? So, I think Russia maybe, thank you, Bonnie, maybe has the possibility of being a country eventually that starts to fall apart and parts of it break away because they finally go, this is just, this is not working. But I don't see it being a failed state I guess you could also say failed state could be because of politics as well. It's funny, somebody said, but you're not totally wrong. JSM is saying Kevin McCarthy is a failed state, meaning the votes that are happening in the Congress. That's a microcosm of a failed, but it's not a failed state. But it's a microcosm of the kind of failure potentially, where literally the politics has gotten so bad that nothing can get done. Somalia, the only question would be, what about Somalia is the definition of it being a failed state, right? Even Yugoslavia, I'm not sure, I see Cheyenne saying I'm Croatian. I'm not sure even Yugoslavia that you'd call it a failed state. I don't think it's a failed state just because it splits apart, even though it's a state that failed, right? Czechoslovakia failed because it fell apart. But I don't know. Well, again, I think we'd have to Google and see what the actual definition is of failed state. Sorry, people joining here. 70% of Russia is Siberia, and they don't have any other land that doesn't, All right, let's look here. About 6 o'clock. I'll go another minute or two. Harvey, how are you there? I just saw you there. Sorry, looking at YouTube again. I always love when people sort of debate amongst themselves on YouTube. It's always interesting. Let me see here. All right, not seeing anything there. I'll look at another TikTok question, and then I think we'll go, because I wanted to go over to the Discord tonight, and we're going to talk about the failed House of Representatives. That was an interesting question, though. 1 second here. Well, the Russians using chemical weapons. The thing is, I keep getting a little confused on that one, because in Syria, it wasn't the Russians, it was the Syrians, as I recall. You get into the whole phosphorus discussion, and whether, which I think people think the Russians used, was it white phosphorus or whatever in Ukraine, whether that's considered a chemical weapon in the same ballpark. I mean, I don't know, right? Because clearly they've used it, but it hasn't created the kind of deaths you saw in Syria. The stuff in Syria was horrific, I see the Jesus crazies are here. Bye, Jesus crazy. Sorry, you can go do that on a Russian site if you want. All right, last question. What chance is there that Biden will send our ground troops that he has deployed to our NATO countries like Poland to help fight the Ukrainians? I think zero chance. The only way something like that is going to happen is if Russia uses nuclear weapons. Then there's a chance. Although even then, I'm not convinced it would be ground troops. I think it might be something more on the lines of, I see, Elise, I'll get to yours in one quick sec here. I think it might be something more on the lines of NATO doing a no-fly zone over Ukraine, so that it's more of a, we're not engaging with troops on the ground. But you never know. We also could have I don't know what you want to call it. NATO peacekeepers go in. We could have NATO peacekeepers go in and fill the rest of Ukraine and say, you know what? For example, Russia's occupying all of this. The front line of the war is, here. Well, it's pretty much along the borders. I'm going to try to do it. I'm trying to do it okay. I may not be doing it perfectly here, but all along this line, you've got the battles going on. That means the rest of this is free. We could put NATO troops spread out all through all of this and tell the Russians, we've now got NATO. This is if Russia were to use a nuke or chemical weapons, and say, you know what? That's it. We're now going to have NATO troop peacekeepers, assuming Ukraine asks for it, NATO peacekeepers all over Ukraine. And if you touch one of them, you're at war with us. I mean, that's a possibility right there. But I think, U.S. troops going to war with the Russians, we don't want that to happen. It's only going to happen if the Russians do something outrageous like use nukes. Hello, dog. Oh, I'm sorry. You're not covered up here. Okay. I got a little whine from the dog. She wasn't covered up. Elise is saying in a super chat question. Thank you, Elise, for that. By some definitions, Russia is somewhat a failing state. Oh, that's what we were getting, the question we had earlier. Its borders are undefined, and the government doesn't have a monopoly on violence. That's an interesting point. The Wagner Group, right, because the Wagner Group is now competing with the state itself. It's becoming almost a little bit of a ministry of defense on its own. Here we go. Ben actually brought up the definition on Google of a failed state. We were talking about whether Russia was a failed state or not. Definition of a failed state, according to Google: a state whose political or economic system has become so weak that the government is no longer in control. Okay. Actually, that is a good way of putting it. So actually, in some ways, countries that fall apart are failed states, because clearly, well, I guess anytime there's a civil war, would you call it a failed state? It's an interesting question as to, Marion, this is the kind of question Marion would ask. All right, define failed state. Yeah, no, I don't know. It's an obvious question, and it's one that I think we're all kind of struggling with. Very interesting. All right, guys, I'm going to go. It's 5:06. We're going to go over to the Discord, and we'll talk a little bit about what happened in Congress today with the votes in the U.S. House of Representatives. And then tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, Friday, I will be meeting you again. Saturday, I'm going to skip most likely the Discord, the Hangout. We do a Hangout on Saturday mornings for all the subscribers on YouTube, the paid subscribers on, I'm sorry, a Hangout for the paid subscribers on TikTok, but I'm flying Saturday afternoon for Chicago. I thought I was flying Sunday. I'm flying Saturday instead. So Saturday morning, I may be like sitting here nervously trying to remember what I forgot to pack. So, all right, guys, I will see you tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Eastern time. There you go. We'll talk more about Ukraine. Okay. And actually, you know what? Well, no, tomorrow, let's not do this tomorrow. Okay. Let's go to Discord, discord.aravosis.com, and I'll meet you guys there. And we're going to talk a little bit about the latest votes in the House of Representatives, all that chaos. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you all as well. Thank you for the gifts. Thank you for the mods. Everything. All right, guys. Okay. We got it all. All right. Goodbye, you. Boom.